Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com. Hey, it's Olly. Welcome back to the podcast. Really happy to have you here today. And I've been getting quite a few emails about the episode that I recorded just before New Year, a few days before New Year, about I talked about language goals and these big audacious goals, and quite a few of you have kind of written in to say that really resonated with you, and that you've been trying to learn to think big a little bit with your goals. And this is something that I'm really trying to do this year, 2016. I'm really just trying to knock it out of the park and really aim as high as I possibly can, and just see what happens. I know a number of you have mentioned the fact that my goal is to get on TV in Hong Kong in 2016. It's kind of crazy, but it's also really exciting, and that kind of thing just really kind of pushes you and motivates you to to try harder and to work every day, and when you wake up every day to think like, okay, well, what am I doing to move towards my goal? So really excited about that. Also excited about today's question. Let's dive in now to today's question from Sam.
Hi, Ollie. My name's Sam. I'm from the United States, and I'm a big fan of your podcast. I just wanted to start off by saying how totally stoked and excited and impressed I am that you've decided to choose Cantonese as the language you wanted to bring up to a C2 level. I think that's really cool, made even cooler by the fact that it's a really difficult language that uses a ton of slang. So I wanted to ask for my question today. When you're studying a language like Cantonese that uses a lot of idioms and has a lot of seemingly ever-evolving and changing slang, how do you stay on top of it and learn it and maintain it, even as it changes constantly? Any tips that you would have on the subject would be greatly appreciated, and I look forward to hearing them. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Okay, Sam, thank you for such a cool question, and for your interest in Cantonese. And reading between the lines, I guess maybe you've got an interest in Cantonese as well, or maybe you have a connection to Hong Kong of some kind. Really cool to hear. Thanks for the question. And for those of you who don't know, Cantonese is a really, really interesting language because, well, for many, many reasons. But at its heart, Cantonese is a spoken language. It's not a written language. All right. So as a kid at school, you're going to study traditional Chinese, which is not the same as the Cantonese that you speak at home and on the street with your friends and family. And I think because of this difference between the spoken and the written language, that means that the spoken language evolves really quickly. There's also the fact that, Hong Kong is a very, very vibrant culture and is very fast moving as well. Obviously, lots of recent political history. I think all of these things combined make it an incredibly fluid language that's changing all the time, like Sam says. And one of the characteristics of Cantonese is you've got lots and lots of slang. There is huge influence in the language from the local culture, from the food, and things like that, even more so than other languages. And so it's very, very common to find idioms and slang expressions in Cantonese that relate to food or some kind of cultural reference. And this can be very, very tough for foreigners learning Cantonese, because you've really, you've got to have such a deep knowledge of everything to do with the language and the culture in order to really understand all this stuff. And so Sam's question is like, well, when you've got so much slang and so much new stuff entering into the language all the time, how do you keep on top of it? And really good question. So I've got a few thoughts on this, because it's difficult to know where to start really. When I was in Japan, I often met people who were learning English and would kind of speak in idioms, and people who would kind of religiously study English, take their lessons every week for years on end, never really speak it. And so whenever you came to have a chat with them, they would kind of they just really liked all these idioms that they'd learned, that their teacher must have taught them, and they would kind of speak in very, very odd turns of phrase. Like you'd be asking someone about a conversation they had, and they said, rather than saying oh, my friend told me this, that, or the other, they'd say, yeah, I heard it from the horse's mouth that we're having dinner tonight, or I don't know what, stuff like that. And then everything, whenever they weren't sure about something, everyone would always be beating around the bush. And it's very, very weird, and obviously in terms of a conversation, it's not cool because you know that's just not how we speak. An idiom is something that you pull out and you use at a very choice moment in order to make a point. And so that was the time when I really realized that, okay, you can very much overdo idioms. Idioms and slang, you know, they can be very cool and they can give you this really nice local flavor, but you can also completely overdo them. And so I think from that moment, I was always very cautious about spending too much time learning idioms and slang, because in that experience, it really added nothing to the conversation. Having said that, when I remember learning a bunch of really cool idioms in Spanish many years ago, which have kind of been really useful. So I remember my friend Tomás teaching me idioms in Spanish like siembra semillas y recogerás cosechas, which is if you sow seeds, then you will harvest crops in the future. And another one which is really cool, which is no hay mal que por bien no venga, which is like every good thing there's a good point to every, what's this English idiom? Like everything bad that happens for a reason, you know, something like that. And you know, there have been a few times recently when I've been talking Spanish and I've come out with one of these idioms and at really the right time, and it's, you know, it gives you a very nice angle to your language, and it allows you to really make a point in a way that you wouldn't otherwise be able to. But in that case, the reason that was so effective for me was because I understand the idiom and I also speak pretty good Spanish, so I'm able to kind of combine the two and just kind of drop them at just the right time. So you've got this funny thing with idioms and slang, whereby you can either come across as a really pompous idiot, or you can also kind of make people go, wow, this guy speaks the language really, really well. And it's about finding that balance. And for me, it's always been a case of the better you speak the language, the more useful the idioms are. And when I'm just starting out, I really don't worry too much about idioms at all, because I think that you've got much more to lose than to gain. Now, I think that there are 2 points here. When you're just starting out with a language, I think that if you're going to learn slang and idioms, and I'm kind of grouping them together here, they're not exactly the same, but you could call them kind of like in both cases, slang and idioms are kind of non-standard language that you wouldn't tend to use in a formal setting in everyday conversation, you know. So really for me, the way that I choose whether to learn something or not is whether it's useful for me in context. So when I had a lesson with my Cantonese tutor the other day, and he taught me a really cool phrase, which was "yak yeah din do," which literally means, like, I was talking about it literally means day and night are flipped over. And I was talking about a trip to America that I made. I was in the States last week, and only for a few days, and I was totally jet lagged and I was trying to explain this. I was trying to explain how my schedule has been completely messed up and I'm no longer functioning properly. And he was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, din do," which was just the perfect expression for that perfect situation. So that's something that I'm going to always remember now, because it's very, very relevant to me. That's very different from, for example, going out and looking through a book of idioms. And I know people that do this. They buy books of idioms in a language, 101 English idioms or whatever, and they just go out and learn them. And it makes no sense at all. So I'd much rather learn something, a small number of things that are really useful and be able to use them very accurately, than to learn a bunch of stuff that has no context. So this is the first thing to say, is like I only ever really learn stuff that is useful for me in a specific context. Just like when I was with some Japanese friends over Christmas, and I don't know all that many Japanese expressions, but my friend taught me ame futte chikatameru, which is saying literally after it rains, which is a bad thing, the earth will become more solid afterwards, which is a good thing, right? So it's a bit like saying every cloud has a silver lining. And again, I learned that in a very specific situation, and it was something that I'm going to remember because of that context. So the other thing that I'd say about that is I would try and learn stuff that comes up over and over again. All right, so expressions in Cantonese that come up over and over again, or slang that you hear every day, that's something that is worth paying attention to. There's all kinds of slang that even native speakers of the language who have lived abroad for a few years, they kind of get out of date with Cantonese slang. So it really is something you can't keep up with. So I think you've either got to, like I said before, focus on stuff that's really useful in context for you, or else just learn things that come up over and over again. One slang expression in Cantonese I learned very early on was "lego tao," which literally means your head, but you use that to say that someone's talking rubbish, or like whatever they've just said is not true, and to disagree with someone. So that's a slang expression, but it's also very, very common, and so I learnt that quickly because that was very, very useful. So all of which is to say that I don't think that slang and idioms are things that you should really be over preoccupied with. I think they can cause more harm than good in terms of learning to speak the language naturally. And you should anything that you do learn, base it around what you need to say yourself, what you learn in context, or else something that you hear over and over again. And but if you get it right, if you learn to use slang and idioms well, especially at an advanced level, they can really add a fantastic flavour to your language that you really wouldn't otherwise get. So I hope that's helpful, Sam. And if you'd like to ask me a question, then please do. I love getting questions from you. You can go over to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask. I also would really, really appreciate a review on iTunes. That really helps other people find the show. And if you'd like to do that, you can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/review. Now, at the end of every episode, I like to leave you with a quote or a resource of some kind on the topic of the show. And since we're talking about Cantonese today, I'd like to leave you with two very, very cool things to check out. The first of which is a guy called Carlos Do, and he is a Canadian guy who lived in Hong Kong for ages, and he made really, really funny YouTube videos teaching specifically Cantonese slang. They're really funny, they're really short, so you should definitely check that out. The other thing is, someone made a poster recently of 100 and something idioms in Cantonese, and he drew this beautiful poster that kind of, with all these like cartoons representing all of these different idioms in Cantonese. And if you're in any way interested in Chinese culture, you're going to absolutely love this. I'm going to put a link to both of these things in the show notes, which will be at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 77. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and in case you didn't already know, I teach languages in a rather unusual way through stories. Now, stories are a great way to learn a new language because when you're engrossed in a story, you remember things more easily, and the mechanics of the language just start clicking inside your brain. It's quite something, and if you'd like to find out how you can learn a new language or improve your skills in a language that you already know and do it with the power of stories, then you should check out my free Story Learning Kit, which will teach you exactly how this method works and how you can use it yourself to learn a new language. Visit storylearning.com/podkit, that's PODKIT, to get free access. Inside, you'll find explanatory videos, masterclasses, worksheets, short stories to practice with, and much, much more. Once again, that is storylearning.com/podkit, PODKIT, and if you're lucky, you might also find a link in the podcast description or show notes of this episode.